Well, hey guys. So sitting down here to finish this this part 3 of our series on the Articles of Confederation, looking at the interim period between 1783, the end of the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris, and 1787, the so-called Constitutional Convention, which I'm going to throw this term out there. This came up in class, but this term of the Constitutional Convention was an unconstitutional convention. So we're going to talk about how this elite consensus that you see on the screen here, who they were, and how they kind of did what they did and why. The basic tenet that we have to understand is that we need more government, not for the sake of having more government, but because the national government that is needed in order to keep the states functioning together needed to be stronger. The Articles of Confederation, as they existed, created a Congress that had very limited authority. And we looked at that in part 1. We saw the successes and failures in part 2, and now we're going to transition into what the elite consensus believed about what needed to change and why. And so our first look is into something that James Madison has said. Prior to the Constitutional Convention, the Philadelphia Convention in February of 1787, Madison writes, "Our situation is becoming every day more and more critical. No money comes into the federal treasury. No respect is paid to the federal authority. The existing Confederacy is tottering to its foundation." Madison's belief here is that the national government, or the federal government, needs the authority to be able to maintain commercial relationships across the states, needs to be able to maintain an army and a navy to keep things secure, to keep them from being keep the states protected from outside invasions, because again, it was a military alliance at its very beginning, at its very core. But even this foundation is being shattered. It's being shaken by the inability for states to have a revenue source. In class, we have or will talk about, as I record this now, we already have talked about this, but when the Land Ordinance of 1785 was passed, and states ceded land to the national government, it gave the national government a revenue stream. It gave the national government the possibility to sell land. The Congress, the Confederation Congress, was never able to benefit from this because a new Constitution was created, a new Congress was created, and so this revenue stream benefited our government, but it benefited this new national government, the stronger national government. The question that we have is, as we go through this, relates to how are this elite consensus, Madison, Washington, Alexander Hamilton, how are these men going to convince the states to give up their sovereignty that they enjoy to a national government that they don't want, but how do they convince them that it's the government that they need? Okay. Turning to another letter, one that's very familiar to us. This is one that we look at in class. This is the letter from Washington to Knox, February 3rd, 1787. The moment is indeed important. If government shrinks or is unable to enforce its laws, fresh maneuvers will be displayed by the insurgents. And he's referring specifically to Massachusetts, Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. Anarchy and confusion must prevail, and everything will be turned topsy-turvy. And then there shouldn't be a period there. In that state is how Washington finishes that sentence. But he does say that if the government cannot enforce its laws, who knows where Shays' Rebellion goes? If they're able to overthrow the government of Massachusetts and overthrow the state of Massachusetts, who knows how far rebellion will go? Everything will be for loss. That's Washington's fear. Jefferson, we know as is the voice of reason, in a lot of ways. And so, in Jefferson's words, though, he says, "God forbid," and this is from Jefferson to William Smith. Jefferson is not in the United States. He is actually in France when he writes this. He says, "God forbid we should ever be 20 years without such a rebellion. We have had 13 states independent for 11 years. There has been one rebellion. That comes to one rebellion in a century and a half for each state. What country before ever existed a century and a half without a rebellion?" And so if we think about his math, right, 11 years times 13 states is 143 years, approximately 150 years per state, right? This is not a big deal, he says, right? To have one rebellion here is not a big deal at all, right? And so what we need to understand is as our nation, as the United States, understanding the United States as not one nation but a collection of nations, a confederation of nations, of states. They are coming together with an increased emphasis now on what it means to be unified. In order to unify for the purposes that they want, they need a government that can maintain that balance between strength and sovereignty, national strength and national sovereignty, and state sovereignty. So instead of now panic and freak out, the idea is to super glue everything back together, right? To create something that's foundationally stable, right? And so Jefferson writes to Madison again early in the year of 1787. This fancy Latin phrase, and you know what? If you don't know Latin, I don't know Latin, right? What Jefferson says to Madison is I prefer the tumult of liberty to the quiet of servitude, right? Rebellion in Jefferson's terms, in Jefferson's mind, is a natural way to keep republics. That naturally what will happen in a republic is something will happen to cause a need for a reset. Rebellion is a reset button. And so he liked the idea. So the tumult of liberty to the quiet of servitude is his way of saying that instead of ceding power and sovereignty to a national or a central government, a federal government with all the power over the states, he would prefer a rebellion here and there to keep things in check. That's Jefferson, right? That's Jefferson. Don't think that his idea was the one that was best or whatever. A historian that I like to follow says that if we are all Jeffersonians, our government is more like an anarchy than it is anything else. And so he balances things out in that way, right? So the solution is the Constitution. The solution that they're headed towards in Philadelphia, that they'll meet in Philadelphia, is to get rid of the Articles of Confederation and propose a new Constitution. Washington himself says, I'm not going to Philadelphia. And he says in another letter, I'm not going unless we agree that we're going to start from scratch. We're going to start over. We're going to create a government that is strong enough, that is sovereign over the states, but a system that is going to allow us the ability to maintain ourselves peacefully as a nation. And so there are three big proponents of what happens here, and the three names that we commonly hear attached to constitutional understanding is James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. These three guys, as they will start working on in the middle of the summer of 1787, is a set of essays that promote constitutional thought. They promote the ideas and the ideals and the concepts and the nitty-gritty of what the Constitution includes. It is their essays that are published collectively called the Federalist Papers. Madison writes 30-something of them. Hamilton writes 40-something of them. And then John Jay writes 5. John Jay suffers an injury in late 1787 and is unable to really help them out. Hamilton is a New Yorker. Madison is a Virginian. John Jay, I believe, comes from New York also, I think. Maybe Pennsylvania. That's a good question. Maybe Maryland. He comes from Maryland. But Hamilton is interesting because he comes from a state. New York was vehemently against the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton is one of the only men that stays from that state that stays in Philadelphia the entire summer, which is good for him because then he's able to start making an influence in the Philadelphia Convention. As it was, he was outnumbered by all of his other New York delegates, and so anytime they wanted to vote on something, he would always lose. So anyways, that's that. The Federalist Papers include all of our information, and they basically say and make it clear that a new constitution is necessary. These set of documents will be directed almost solely and 100% to the people of the state of New York, because the Constitutional Ratification Convention, which would be held after the Constitution was drafted, where New York would be able to decide, do they want as a state to ratify or approve the Constitution. These essays are intended to convince the people in that convention that yes, this is what we need. And so this comic, I thought this was kind of funny. No, sir, you don't need to bow before the Burger King. The idea that that bowing before the national government is one thing, but to bow before King George III one last time is something that we see happening here. At the same time, we're creating a new constitution. Take a look at the stars that are popping up for you here. Hamilton believes that this is the last stage of national humiliation. If we continue down the path that we're going in, we are going to be overthrown and overtaken by Great Britain again. The stars you see on your screen are where the British are still in forts. They are still in our back country. They never leave these forts in the Ohio River Valley or along the Great Lakes. The British are still occupying with soldiers. They're stationed here. They don't intend to give it up. And so what are we going to do? How do we get them out? Without a significant national government that has enough presence and enough unity to be able to convince Great Britain that they have a need to leave. Great Britain wanted us as a trading partner. They didn't want us to go away and hate them forever. But in order to maintain their interests, they keep a military presence. Another point that Hamilton makes is that we have this disputed land. When Great Britain gave us territory, all the way west to the Mississippi River, there were some rivers and there were some locations and places that they used to describe our boundaries that were very unclear. And one of them was this disputed area between us and Spanish West Florida. When it says our boundary stops at where Spanish Florida starts, that wasn't 100% clear, and so we have to fix these things. And we need a government that is able to do that. That's the idea. That's how Hamilton promotes it in the Federalist 15. So as a recap, I want to point out the differences, the contrast between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution in terms of these principles you see on the left as they stack up, right? The preamble to our Constitution says that the Federalist idea is that we are creating a more perfect union. Not a perfect union, but a more perfect union. That sovereignty will be shared between the states and the national government. That the representation of states is not 100% equal. It's equal in the Senate, but it's proportional in the House of Representatives. Taxation will occur both at the state and federal level. That the powers of Congress are significantly increased upon what the Congress had under the Articles. We add the ability to tax. We add the ability to control interstate commerce, to create currency and to maintain and regulate currency, as well as to crush rebellions with a formidable army and a navy. It's interesting to note that that the preference still exists for state militia, which is where the Second Amendment comes in. In the ratifying conventions after the Constitution is created, a number of amendments are requested to have a militia over an army, a standing army and a navy. And so that's where the fear of a standing army and a navy comes in with quartering of troops, as well as the Second Amendment to right to bear arms for the purpose of a militia. Legislation has to be approved through a process that goes Senate plus House or House plus Senate, and then approval by the President. There are pieces of legislation or pieces of that process that are very conflicting and confusing for the purpose of making sure that laws aren't passed easily, but laws are possible to be passed. And if an amendment wants to be created, if you want to change the Constitution, it's again a proposal plus ratification. It's a two-step process, proposed by 2/3 of Congress and ratified or approved by 3/4 of the states. This is by and large the necessities of comparing and contrasting the Articles of the Constitution. Special thanks to the creator of this slide series, Thank you very much.